Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this morning in the UK, but probably this afternoon in some parts of your world. As I am just going through the first few introductory slides, it might be a good idea for you to use the chat box and just type in one word into the chat box. What does assessment mean to you? That's just really to get us focused on this webinar today about assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment. Don't worry about all these terms because we're going to go through them in a moment. Thank you for the introductions, Bethan. And it was weird because you were talking then about my work with different organisations, and I had actually forgotten, I didn't tell Bethan this, but I had done a pretty big project with the British Council, all to do with assessment a few years ago. And it was mainly to do with something about how we can formatively assess our learners. More about that later, though, and how we can involve Collins in on this as well. So during this webinar, we are going to explore the what, the how, and the why of assessing your learners. We're going to discuss the benefits of why we do this. Then we're going to explore ideas for incorporating the newly published Collins Progress books into your teaching and learning. More about that as we come on to those slides. And then, of course, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions, either as we're going through, as Bethan said, or right at the end. This is absolutely brilliant that I can see people using the chat box and typing in one word. Before we look at what you've actually typed, I'm just going to show you this lovely slide, because does thinking of assessment make you feel like this? To think, oh my goodness, I just don't know how to start, where to start, what to do. I hope, if it does, that by the end of this webinar, you'll be feeling a lot more invigorated and clearer about how to assess your learners. There's another question for you to think about as we're going through this webinar, and that is, how can we see learning progression? This is such a big question, really, about when we teach. We may think that learning is happening because we are imparting our knowledge with learners, but can you actually see learning? This is actually a lot more difficult. Like, for example, looking at this little girl here, looking through the microscope, can you actually consider if she is learning or not? Or this little boy on the next picture, he is actually doing something that a Professor Coe, came up with, saying that learning happens when learners have to think hard. But we've got to get from that point about learning and how to measure their learning. How can we do that? So, learning. Yes, thank you. Somebody, AW, has written into the chat box, yes, this little girl is learning. Yes, learning is happening. I asked you earlier to write in, what is assessment? Now, I've done this before, and I could use the word cloud, the interactive tool, and I came up with these words here for like formative assessment, assessments, classroom strategy, activities, teachers, use, time. So judgment, somebody has written in hours just now. Let me just go back. Assessment is important to know your students better. Yeah, this is great. So we're nailing it pretty well here. Okay. I'm thinking now about the different types of assessment. Okay. And we have mentioned in the title of our webinar about formative and summative assessment. Now, some of you may be very, very familiar with these two terms already. For some of you, it might be new for you. But we basically split assessment into two different categories: formative, ongoing, informing learning, or summative. Okay, and I am going to go through this in a bit more detail over the next few slides. Formative assessment is also known, or could be known, I don't want to be too pedantic about it, but as assessment for learning. And it's all about making an informed judgment. Somebody wrote that already, so thank you very much. You are doing this, or will be doing this, continuously with your learners all the time, and you can do it in so many different ways. Okay. Formative assessment might mean giving feedback. It might mean, in terms of a task, reflection. We will just look at that again in more detail, just so that it becomes clearer and clearer. It might help if we consider formative assessment in terms of a cycle. Is that okay? And then thinking about this approach to teaching and learning that uses specific feedback to improve learners' understanding and performance. The idea is that the feedback that we provide to our learners about their progress and performance allows them to be more involved and take ownership of the learning process. As a result, they should gain confidence in knowing what they're expected to learn and how to achieve it, and what standard they should be working at. Now, learners will need to be given the tools to become more active in their learning, thinking about where they are in their progress, and where they want to be and how they are going to get there. Teachers, or us, we should help learners to identify their next steps in learning. So keep these things in your mind for partway through this presentation. Perhaps actually I could sum it up into 3 key questions for successful formative assessment. Here, I'd like you to use the chat box, okay? And thinking about these 3 questions and how they can scaffold our teaching. Now, it could be that you're teaching maths, science, English, PE, art, but there are just three key questions about our learners. I've already said them, but I'm just going to see if I can get you to summarize 3 questions there. Okay. Nora is saying it's not visible to me. Aha. Archana is saying why, what, and how. Okay. That's more related to, I would say, the actual definition or the process of assessing. One more. Have the learning objectives been achieved? Okay. All right. Okay. So the questions are coming up. Don't worry. Solve, find, explain for maths. Okay. Yes, that's lovely. I'm going to wait a bit more here. Okay. Bit more time here. Hello. Some people are still signing on. That's good. If I give you the first question, whoops, right. Explain your answer, okay. More so, you can get that later on when we get into the nitty-gritty of carrying out formative assessment in the classroom, but this is more of a global question. Now, I've just had somebody give me an answer. It's moved off the screen. Okay, good about checking, can the students improve their learning? Check what check with learners what was going on. Okay, that's great. You're so active here. This is brilliant. Feedback, learning progression, evaluate, explain, and analyze. Brilliant. Okay, so if we take a step back, perhaps, and think about, okay, yeah, open-ended questions. This is great. How teachers can improve their teaching. How much the child knows already. Good, Dipti, because that is kind of what I was aiming for here. Where is your learner going? Okay. Where is your learner right now? Okay. And then how can we get the learner there? So that is basically 3 key principles really for successful formative assessment. And what we've been looking at here, or what you have been giving me in the chat box, is how we can do this with our learners. But these 3 questions, if you keep those in mind, they can really scaffold our teaching in any subject. Okay, so formative assessment, it's part of teaching and learning. It takes place during the learning process, not at the end. And if you want to use the chat box to use the definition of that type of assessment that comes at the end, I'm monitoring it. And it informs learning, and it helps to make the learners autonomous. Okay. Learners should be actively involved with their self-evaluation. And going back to the middle bullet point, okay, with the learning process, what I mean by that as well, that we should be giving high quality, specific feedback which will help our learners improve. Now, there's more later in terms of particular materials that we could use to help them do this. My next question would be, okay, is why do we assess? And I think some of you have already said that assessment becomes integrated with teaching and learning, okay? And because it's to support, as somebody's already wrote, to support the achievement of learning intentions or objectives. Somebody, okay, so excuse me. So why do we assess? We want to help our learners again take responsibility, and it's to recognize what the learners can do and also what they can't do, and to help us plan the next steps. Sometimes I've been asked what the difference is between formative assessment and assessment for learning. And just to be very kind of simplistic about it, really, I could say that assessment for learning is the process, okay, it's the process, whereas a formative assessment is the purpose. So just bear those little words in mind. I'm also quite often asked is, what is summative assessment? I think it's appropriate just here to distinguish between the two, formative and summative assessment. Some people say it's a bit like the soup. For formative assessment, it's a bit like the chef tasting the soup. And then for summative assessment, it's a bit like the clients or the customers tasting the soup, the end product. Summative isn't quite the opposite of formative assessment. When you're looking at here, this picture of students taking exams, we could think of it more about how far the learner has come and what they've learnt. Now, it usually involves giving a grade. You may be in need of grades for reporting to parents or to benchmark across groups of different learners. Again, there's a bit more later to show you how we can help you with this. Another big question for you, and I'd really love you to use your chat box here, is, okay, how do you currently assess your learners in the classroom? I'd be very interested to hear how you would actually do it in the classroom right now. And that term assess, it could be used either in a formative way, ongoing way, continuous way, or it could be in terms of written tests, end of year exams, monthly exams, exams taken from external exam authorities. Somebody has said here, open-ended questions, exploration tasks, okay, quick tests. Priyanka is saying she does it both formative and summative, end of unit assessments, slip tests. I've just read, I think I've just read slip tests, which could be exit tests, getting the learner reflection sheets, fantastic, FAs, continuous assessments, lovely, activities, quiz, projects, quizzes, exit slips, lovely, Mentimeter. Wow, I haven't used that for a few months, actually. Thank you for reminding me about Mentimeter. Portfolios, interesting. I'm going to pick up on portfolios later on, okay? So please stay active because I want to ask you a bit more about portfolios. Jamboards, this is a digital piece of software, isn't it, Jamboard? Concept maps, oh, we are well on the ball here. Reflection, okay, projects, weekly tasks, assignments, okay. Well, that's great. I think we could spend a long time looking at this and then also getting them, getting your answers put into different categories as well. That could be some work for us to think about. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got the time in this webinar to actually sort that out. But we've spent a bit of time now reflecting on our own practice and perhaps our own context and our own students, okay? Now, how do we clarify where our learners are going? And how do you find out? And you've given me lots of different answers already, okay? And when and how often do you do this, okay? And how do you respond to the information that you get about your learners' learning? Okay, so we're pretty much, I think, singing from the same hymn book here, which is very good to have at this point in the webinar. It might help us in a way to crystallize what you have been writing in your in the chat box here, in terms of to crystallize everything. By using David Williams' AFL framework, Assessment for Learning framework. David Williams has given he has spent an immense amount of time doing research into assessment for learning. I think he was at King's College London. And he's also worked with some Australian authorities as well. But a while back, he developed this framework. And I think this is a great little picture to keep in mind when you are trying to set up formative assessment or assessment for learning in the classroom. Yes, so he's pretty much being the guru for leading the way. Consider as well those three questions about where our learner is and how we can get our learner there. Okay, so where the learner is going, where the learner is, and how to get there. And then we've got our teacher, peer, and learner. We have got as well clarifying all three bodies, teacher, peer, and learner, can help clarify, share, and understand the learning intentions. The teacher can help engineer effective discussion tasks, activities that elicit the evidence, okay? And then we can also, as teachers, give feedback. But our peers, or the peers in the classroom, can also do that, because by interacting between each other, they are learning from each other and bouncing ideas. And then, as we've spoken already about the learner taking responsibility for their next steps, which is really important. So they need to know where they are going and why they are responsible for their learning. Again, I'm going to show you some other quotes from another research body that will help back up what we're saying here. Now, how does this framework work in practice? I think some of you may have given me some ideas already. You may want to use the chat box, okay, just to repeat what I've said. Okay. I can just read the one from Alice here saying we've got a tracking sheet. Okay, that's good. I'm very interested, Alice, if you could at the end, I'm going to ask you that question perhaps at the end about the tracking sheet and also the portfolio. Thank you, Naga. Okay, checklist, rubrics, anecdotal remarks, continuum, weekly class test. Now I wonder, the weekly class tests we give grades to. So I'm going to just put up here just very few ideas because crystallize everything. Exit tickets as well. Lovely. Short tests, quizzes, okay, and then concept checking. That's a difficult one, I find, with concept checks, because how do we ask that question? Do you understand? Is that effective? Okay. Hello, Tata Kazi. Okay, so short test quizzes. Okay, this is again, it's coming up. Application-based questions. This is all linked in with our critical thinking. And okay, so we have got formative assessment. Yes, some other ideas. Self-assessment. Now, I've got one other idea here. Learners complete a test as a group after they have looked at the test individually. Have you thought about that? So somebody has spoken about a weekly quiz, but with that, could they complete the test as a group afterwards, and then to look at the answers together, to discuss the answers together? This last option, I think, is a very beneficial way of using peers to move the learning forward and to help each other. I'll show you some examples in a moment from some of the Collins materials that you could use. I've got another question for you, which is up on the screen, okay? And that is just something for you to consider. There's no, it's just more of a reflective question, okay? But do you sometimes find that often you need more evidence of their understanding? And how do we encapsulate that evidence without it becoming too onerous for you? Because I think that's, I worked once on a project in Kazakhstan, and they had corridors full of portfolios, which became quite onerous. It was portfolios for continuous assessment, but it became quite onerous for teachers and principals to actually wade through the data. So at this point, I think I could help you with exploring some materials from HarperCollins, because we've explored up to now the what, the why, and the how of assessing our learners. That is great, but in some ways we need to have some extra material to help us. Yes, in terms of questions, like when we're teaching in the classroom, but sometimes we might need a bit more structure or scaffolding to help consolidate our learner skills. HarperCollins have been asked by teachers from all around the world for extra support to help learners build their skills and understanding. And so just very recently, progress books have been published at primary and lower secondary level. And they have been published from stage 1 all the way through to stage 9. And they are published in the 3 different core subjects: English, maths, and science. So there are 6 at primary level and 3 at lower secondary level. We'll have a quick look really, for, first of all, at the progress books at primary. And here we have got additional practice books. Oh, sorry, I'll start again. The progress books will help you consolidate the learner's skills through practice, because as teachers, we need more questions to help us embed each concept or skill, or different ways of asking perhaps that same question underpinning that learning objective. So for each week or each topic in the 3 core subjects, this extra practice material has been provided or published by Collins. Teachers, or we would like to help. We would like some extra help with formative assessment throughout the year, so to help us check how your students are doing and to identify areas where they as individuals, or perhaps even as a whole class, may be struggling with. So then we can, I say, okay, they haven't picked up so much on multiplication. Perhaps it's their times tables. We need to go forward with that learning and to plug the holes there and to modify our future teaching. There are also, within the materials, there are 3 longer tests per year, and you could use those as summative assessments in terms of reporting for your to your parents if you have to report, if you report 3 times a year, and also for the school leadership. So they can form part of your summative assessment. Now, there are 2 different formats to the progress books. You could just have the teacher book. Sorry, I've got a copy, but I've left it in the other room. The teacher book or teacher pack, and you just photocopy the pages, or you could have the write-in student versions so that each pupil has their own copy, and that's a good way of looking back through their progress. But it's flexible really for you to use either way, or to use those 2 resources. You could have both resources or just one of them. Let me show you an example up here on the screen of what I mean about the practice tasks that you've got from science here on the left-hand side. And so they are going to complete those tasks after they have done the actual trying out or practical activities in the classroom. Then on the right-hand side, you have got some write-in practice tasks for each week. And this is from here in English. Think back to those 3 questions I asked you. Okay, about where is your learner going and where is your learner now? And here you have got evidence perhaps of their learning, and perhaps how can you help your learner get there? Think also back to Williams's framework and how you could use these practice tasks, okay, as either individual or pairs or in groups. Use the chat box, please, to think about how you could use these practice tasks, okay? I mean, and also I'd love to hear as to whether, whether you or what you consider the advantages of using materials like this. So use the chat box as we're going through, okay? Now, Chris has asked a question, a really important question that we'll come on to at the end about publishing materials for ESOL course books. We will definitely answer that question at the end. Okay. And there's some other great questions coming in here as well. So for me, in terms of advantages of using materials like this as a primary homeroom teacher, and I'm teaching, say, 5 different subjects, and I'm trying to get evidence of consolidation of their learning and also building up the skills, is that I've got tasks here or exercises here that have already been written in line with course books and perhaps in line with the, say, if I'm using the Cambridge curriculum or even another type of curriculum, that all these questions tie in or activities tie in with my learning objectives. Nadia, thank you very much for writing student engagement, because they are engaging with the material that they have got in front of them. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, because to show you some more examples from the materials at primary level, and also thinking back to the where our learner is going questions, and then the approach to one of the tenets of formative assessment is evaluation and reflection. And here we've got an example of the grids that we have got from, let me see, we've got it from English and also from science, okay, with the smiley emojis. So we don't have to write them out. They are printed for us in the teacher guide, and so we can give them to them as little slips, which they can paste onto their work. So when the students have completed a unit of work, they look at the I can statements for the topic and identify how they feel about their learning. If we start this from stage 1, self-assessment becomes very easy. And then if we feel that if the confidence isn't there with the learner, we can easily see where support may be needed. I cannot stress enough of how valuable it is assessing formatively at this level, at primary level, so that we can ensure our learners become more independent. And then having this kind of support helps them and really helps us too as well in the longer term. Now, the next slide here will show you an example of a longer test that we've got here at primary level. One of them, let me just get this bigger. Oops, pardon me. Trying to see if I put this as taken. Yeah, this is from English, okay, testing different kind of questions. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so going back to what I said earlier about the role of summative assessment, here are some examples of how you can use these type of tests in a summative way. This is a test from one of the English papers. And as we move up through the stages, the tests will start to introduce some of the phrasing and question styles from Cambridge from Cambridge Checkpoint and the Cambridge progression tests. Okay, I'd like to say here the questions will not be the same as the ones that you would find in the Cambridge Checkpoint tests, because it's only Cambridge that can provide those questions, because those questions are copyrighted by Cambridge. But we have used assessment experts at HarperCollins to get as close as possible to the type of questions that you would get from Cambridge. And then if you know your learning objectives well from the Cambridge curriculum or any curriculum, you can anticipate the kind of questions you would get. It's all about building skills and understanding, and this is what these materials do. It's not about drilling learner knowledge. So at lower secondary level, we've got the three different stages 7, 8, 9, and then we have the three different core subjects. Okay, so these books help at this level with the transition from primary to secondary, lower secondary. That's at the very beginning. And also it will help if your learners have been in a different system or different schools. As with primary, there are 2 formats for each progress book, and you don't have to buy both, or you could do. And you use the format that works best for you. The teacher's pack contains the answers and mark schemes, and they're also available to download from the Collins website. And then also you've got answers from the student's book if you buy the student's book on the website too. It's the same principles of practice, consolidation of skills and knowledge, followed by a series of practice activities and then tests that you can use, hopefully, as both formatively and summatively. As it's lower secondary and important exams are looming at the end of either stage 9 or stage 11, you're preparing your learners for the IGCSEs or GCSE. Some of the tests that are being offered are going to be more test-like. So in addition, there will be 2 end-of-year assessment papers, and these are going to be even closer in style, but not replicating the Cambridge Checkpoint exams. And you could decide to use those as formal exams if you wish. They're very robust. Again, these tests are very robust because they would have been written by assessment experts that may have worked for exam boards, or likely to have worked for exam boards. I haven't highlighted student reflection and self-assessment because these do very much form part of the process here. And there are going to be feedback sheets to support each test and assessment. So whilst the format is slightly different for the 3 core subjects, the same approaches as a toolkit to assist learning applies. Let's just take a quick look at some examples from lower secondary. Here we've got English. I'm going to go on to the next slide, okay, because I'm going to come back to this one in a moment, looking at it from a different angle. Here we've got an example from maths. We've got an assessment task which can be used in class. What is really good is that we list the topics from the course books which we are testing, and then we offer practice of either calculator or non-calculator. And you can see here at a glance that we're able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of our learners. going back to, as I said earlier, that you could use this as individual work or group work afterwards. Again, it's up to you how much data you want to collect. 2 types of assessment, in class throughout the year, and then the end of year. Let me go on to the next slide. Okay, and that's about securing skills for each chapter. This is here an example from English, from each chapter, unit, or topic. And this is what we do here on this particular slide. In English, we are focusing very much on descriptive skills. Okay, so there may be, when we look at what either the individual has written or groups have written, some reteaching or reinforcement might be needed. But because we have just highlighted here descriptive skills, we can think, okay, they need to have some more guidance on what makes a good piece of descriptive writing. And as I spoke earlier about 2 end-of-year assessments, you've got an example here, again, from English. Here it's a reading comprehension. Just have to go, I think that is stage 9, so it would be pretty much in line with, but not quite the same as a checkpoint, but it's still building skills. So if they do come to take the checkpoint exam, they'll have been well prepared, because taking these exams is not always about knowledge, content knowledge. It's more about the skills. So now I'm also thinking about how you could use these books, the progress books, in terms of developing your learners' metacognitive skills. But first of all, I want to just check in with you about what our understanding is of metacognition, okay? And if you just like to use the chat box there, what do you understand by, the metacognition? So I won't go on to that slide yet. Wow. Because my timer has just come up for the 2:45 mark, I will just move on about. And thank you very much, Dania. Okay, thinking about your thinking, understand how you learn, progress and metacognition. So metacognition is the process involved when learners can awareness of own thoughts, minute details. That's a good one. Okay. Let me just give you a bit more here. It's the process when learners can plan, monitor, and evaluate their own learning. We could do a whole another webinar or session about this, but here I'm just getting us to think about how we can use metacognitive skills whilst using these progress materials, okay? And there's just one other little strap line here. It's making change to learners' learning behaviors. That diagram on the right-hand side about the differences here between metacognition or cognition is, like, as somebody has already said, it's thinking about thinking. So another thing is, you could look at it this way. If my learning or my understanding of a subject isn't going right, what do I need to do to change it? So learners can make their changes to their learning behaviours. I'm going to show you an example now from lower secondary progress, okay? And also I'm just going to bring a bit more research into it, or this is a practice that is used in the UK and I think in quite a few Cambridge schools as well. Exam wrappers. It's when, we are giving our learners, here I've got a test in front of me, But before they approach the task, they're going to plan, monitor, and evaluate. So it's asking our learners to think before and after they complete the assessment. Okay. Yes, exam wrappers were developed by King's College in London as an effective metacognitive tool. What we ask our learners to do is to annotate the question paper before they actually answer the questions. And I'll give you an example on my next slide, okay, of what I mean by that, okay. Now, you could use these 3 questions as standard, or you could get them to tailor-make questions for that particular paper. But it's getting them to think about which question is the most challenging from this test. Name 3 things you would do differently next time, and how can my teacher help? So if you use these materials in a very formative way, it will help our learners ultimately at the end when they do have to sit more formal exams. I've got a brilliant answer here from, I have to scroll back here, from Fazia, okay? Just looking at that before we go on to another facet of teaching and learning, or approach to teaching and learning. The awareness of understanding of one's own thought processes and cognitive abilities. It involves thinking about thinking and can lead to better self-regulation. Brilliant, okay. Thank you for that. Now let's think about, we're moving on quickly to another approach to teaching and learning, and that's feedback, and about the value of giving feedback, which we can do using the progress materials. This quotation comes from the evidence gathered by an organisation called Education Endowment Foundation, based in the UK. Feedback redirects the learner's actions to achieve a goal. It can be about the output of the task, the process of the task, the management of their learning, or self-regulation. Thank you very much, Fasia. And then the feedback can be written, verbal, or given through test or digital technology. So thinking about that feedback, okay, and about thinking about what your practice is at the moment, okay, in terms of giving feedback, and perhaps then how, or here is an example from lower secondary maths, okay, and about how these materials could perhaps help you because they have been printed out, they're tailor-made to the particular topic. It shows students which topics are covered in each question, and where we've got the particular thinking and working mathematically strand, where that is tested. They're in the form of a nice little grid, okay, so the grids are pretty similar for each topic, and it helps students to identify and reflect where they are doing well and where they need extra help or practice. Now, I'm also going to just quickly delve into reflection, okay, because that is another key element to formative assessment, okay, and it's getting learners to reflect back. I'm facilitating an online course at the moment, and one of my teachers actually wrote this just last week, and I thought I'm going to use this quote because we were talking about reflection, and I thought, how apt is this? Just take a moment to read it and use your thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether you agree with this. And then I'm going to show you some more materials about how we can help you. Most students I have taught struggle with thinking about how they learn and develop the strategies to use across different subjects. Whilst they can identify their strengths, they often struggle with identifying their areas of weakness and what they need to do to improve. For example, on tests, they can find the questions, small mistakes they make, but can't identify what problem-solving strategies they can use to help them when they face questions they find difficult or not sure what to do. It's interesting because this is almost touching as well on metacognitive skills. So how there is a bit of a crossover or a mesh of these attributes or approaches to teaching and learning. But thinking about reflection, okay, and here we have got an example from lower secondary English about how we get our learners to use the checklist or tick list, okay, after completing a piece of work, piece of writing, before giving it to you to mark. So after you've graded this piece of work, they look at the feedback sheet and then they fill in the scores they got for each assessment category. They're then given the opportunity to reflect, self-evaluate what they did well, and then what they can do next time. And in this way, they become more familiar of what is expected of them when they are completing a summative assessment. So they've got all the support in terms of feedback sheets. So we've got lots of lovely little help here with reflection. Now, I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to do a very quick recap about what we've explored during this webinar. We have looked at the what, how, and why of assessing your learners. We've discussed the benefits of assessing your learners. We've explored ideas on how you can incorporate the materials from Collins Progress books into your teaching and learning. Now we have got time for questions and answers. Okay. So I'm going to leave this slide up, which is about how you can keep in touch with Collins, but more importantly, how you could request a free sample. If you would like to see some samples from the 3 core subjects, from the 9 stages, from stage 1 all the way through to stage 9.
But we'll head over to those questions now as well. So I'll pick up the one that we spotted for Chris Hanbury before. And I know you've just put it in the Q&A box as well. So thank you very much, Chris. And it's, do you publish any ESOL course books, especially for beginners, such as refugees? So I think you said before, Chris, that you were based in the UK. So ESOL is the English for speakers of other languages. And for sort of recommendations of this, I'd probably recommend you having a look at our Collins EOT catalogue for this, because we publish for a wide range that might be able to have support of this, not just for students or for sort of the younger learners, but also for adults as well who are looking to speak the language as well. We have an English for Life series that might be of interest for reading, listening and speaking as well, and the specific skills there. If you did want to see that catalogue or have any more information about that, then do feel free to email us back on that. And we can give you some pointers and some tips as to how you can support each individual learner at the levels that they're at as well, because we also have the publications for the younger levels, and they're specifically written to assess what it is in the topic rather than the level and the language of English too, which might also be of interest for you as well. So do get in touch with us for some more information, Chris. Okay, right. I think we've got some more questions that came through as well. So we had one that was asking, is there support in primary for bilingual learners? Yes. So as I just mentioned before, so the resources that are made here that Siobhan has gone through today we make sure that they are accessible to all learners, whether they are also English as a second language learner as well. So for instance, for the maths resources, as I mentioned, we're also making sure that the questions are in plain English and not measuring the level of reading for that test, for that question too. So it's suitable for bilingual learners across the board there as well. We've also, so these are the English, maths and science for the moment that we're publishing. But there's also a second element of this question that was asked. So how, do you have any recommendations of how these can be used, or formative and summative assessment in particular, how parents can support with this at home, Siobhan?
Well, that's a really good question. So if you're talking about parents helping, at this point, I'm guessing that the parents have can speak English, and so they'd be guiding their own children through the papers. So yeah, through the activities that they've got, they're going to be used in a formative way, informal way as well. In terms of looking at the actual tasks, getting them to understand what the key words are and the command words perhaps of the questions. It's all linked in with glossaries as well, say for maths and science. Definitely in science, we've got glossaries, haven't we, to help the bilingual learner. Yeah. The visuals as well help when you've got the activities. But because you see, basically, I feel, you answered it in the first part of the question, and that's these books have been written with the bilingual learner in mind, that they are not loaded questions, they're not idiomatic questions. So I think the English is very clear to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So and again, it could be that you as a teacher, you decide that there's a specific worksheet that you would like the students to use as homework, or they've got their own, so the two angles for this is a teacher side and there's also a student side, or they are creating this own portfolio within these resources too. So that can also be something that's used at home for parents to just continue that learning. I'm conscious that we are on the hour here, so we might go over just a little bit, as we've had another really interesting question that's been submitted. So if you do have to go, we do completely understand. Thank you for joining us. But we'll ask one more question and then we'll wrap up for today. But it was a question that I think came off the back of the last couple of slides that you had on there about reflection. Do you have any kind of support for reflection in learning for those lower levels in primary? Are there any kind of tips or tricks that you could help support primary learners in the reflection as well?
Well, that's a good question, and apologies because I did miss that question. I feel that if you have something established right from the very beginning and the same type of format throughout, and here with the Collins materials, you've got the 3 emojis and the I can statements, that they will become more familiar with that format as they progress through. And also it's to do it right from day one, getting learners to reflect from day one. Even though you think they don't understand the language, they will get used to the language. Other person I worked with recently is a firm believer of giving the learners that meta language, the difficult language, right from the day one. So like multiplication for a 5-year-old, it might be difficult, you think it's a difficult concept, but if you use the right terms to begin with, they'll be fine. Yeah.
And I think for those younger levels as well, if you're giving them the tools to build and create a reflective learner from quite a young age then as well, aren't you, for primary, and that will then follow through for going through the years of being then a secondary learner that is also reflective, and then creating these learners that are aware of the subjects and the knowledge that they're that they have as well. So starting at that primary level, starting at that younger age, can then help to support them progress their career in education, I suppose, as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is embedded in research that has gone on for, I'd say, at least 10, 15 years. And it's not just very small scale, it's been large scale. So it's all been backed up by that. And it is becoming more and more standard practice. But here we've got the tools, you know, we don't have to actually think of writing the questions all the time. They're there for us.
Absolutely.